Welcome to Celebrity Type, the place where we dive deep into the fascinating world of celebrities and uncover the stories behind the headlines. George Harrison truly hated him more than anyone. George Harrison, the quiet and spiritual member of the Beatles, was often described as the most reserved of the group. While John Lennon and Paul McCartney were celebrated for their songwriting rivalry and Ringo Starr was the ever-smiling anchor behind the drums, Harrison was seen as calm, patient, and unshakable. Yet even the most peaceful people have limits, and behind closed doors George carried a deep dislike for one particular figure in his life. Fans have long speculated about who it might have been, and recent fictional accounts suggest that George's feelings were far stronger than many imagined. The man in question wasn't a fellow Beatle or even another musician. According to people who were part of Harrison's circle, it was a manager who briefly worked with the band during their transitional years. This individual, whose name rarely appeared in official documents, clashed with Harrison from the very beginning. While John and Paul were focused on writing and recording, George often found himself forced into uncomfortable negotiations with the manager, who underestimated his voice in the group. Harrison, who already felt overshadowed by Lennon and McCartney, saw this as another blow to his place in the band. Friends claimed that George's dislike wasn't rooted in petty arguments, but in a deeper sense of betrayal. The manager often dismissed George's musical ideas, suggesting that his songs weren't commercial enough. These words cut deeply, especially because George was already struggling to have his compositions included on albums dominated by Lennon-McCartney tracks. According to one fictional insider account, George once walked out of a meeting, slamming his notebook shut and saying, "I'd rather play in the garden with my sitar than argue with him again." Those close to Harrison said that moment marked a turning point where his frustration turned into genuine resentment. Over time, the tension only grew. Harrison would later reveal to friends that he felt manipulated, as though every time he tried to express himself, he was pushed aside for the sake of convenience. The dislike became so intense that George began avoiding certain studio sessions altogether, preferring to write music at home where he felt free from judgment. Some of his most beautiful compositions, including ones that later became classics, were born out of those private sessions in his Friar Park estate. Songs he admitted he wrote partly to prove that his doubters were wrong. The irony is that George never let his feelings boil over into public feuds. While John and Paul often aired their disagreements openly, George kept his anger quiet, channeling it into his music. His song Not Guilty, though cut from the White Album, was said to be a thinly veiled message toward the man he despised most. Fans who listen closely to its biting lyrics can catch a glimpse of Harrison's simmering anger. Those who knew George personally often described his dislike as icy rather than explosive. He didn't shout or throw insults. Instead, he would withdraw, offering nothing but silence when the person he disliked entered the room. One fictional account describes a dinner where George remained silent for nearly the entire evening, refusing to acknowledge the man sitting across from him. Others at the table later recalled that the tension was unbearable, even though George never said a word. What makes this story even more fascinating is that years later, when George was asked about people he disliked, he carefully avoided names. But in private conversations, he admitted that this one man had left a scar on his creative journey. He said that being ignored and underestimated in those early years gave him the determination to grow beyond the shadow of Lennon and McCartney. In a way, his resentment fueled his creativity, pushing him to write songs like Something and Here Comes the Sun, which went on to become two of the most beloved tracks in the Beatles' catalog. So while George Harrison may be remembered as the quiet, spiritual Beatle, the truth is that he carried with him a powerful dislike for someone who underestimated his worth. And though he never named the man publicly, his actions, his silence, and ultimately his music told the world everything it needed to know. That resentment shaped him, gave him fuel, and reminded fans that even the calmest souls can harbor deep feelings that never truly fade.